In a nationally televised showdown from Denver, Lauren Boebert came with a plan to provoke, humiliate, and destroy Jasmine Crockett in front of millions. Armed with a strategy crafted days before, Boebert struck first, hoping Jasmine would snap. But Jasmine didn't break. Instead, she dropped one document, 4 lines, signed and sealed, that exposed Boebert's entire plot live on air. What was in that paper? That turned Boebert's trap into her own televised downfall. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The studio in Denver was glowing under searing white lights. Tonight's broadcast wasn't politics. It was war dressed up as conversation. The giant screen behind the stage flashed the theme in blood-red letters: patriotism or propaganda. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing this wouldn't be a discussion. It would be a clash. Every camera was locked in, rolling live coast to coast. No filters, no safety nets. Lauren Boebert entered like a storm in heels. Her posture screamed aggression, and her smile was more like a dare than a greeting. She didn't wait for applause, she demanded it. With every step, she radiated the energy of someone who came not to speak, but to strike. Her eyes scanned the stage like a sniper scanning rooftops, searching, calculating, ready to fire. She sat down, legs crossed like a queen in enemy territory. Then came Jasmine Crockett, silent, slow, and steady. No swagger, no show, just presence. She didn't wave. She didn't blink. She walked straight to her chair, sat down, folded her hands, and looked straight ahead. Calm as still water, but that kind of calm always hides a storm. No smirk, no reaction, just razor-sharp stillness. In the control room above the stage, one of the producers leaned forward, eyes locked on the monitor, barely breathing. He didn't look away as he whispered, "Something's about to explode." And he was right. The air was already sharp. But when the applause died, Boebert struck like a blade drawn in silence. She leaned forward in her seat, eyes locked on Jasmine, voice dipped in poison. "Let's stop pretending," she said. "Crockett isn't here because of skill or substance. She's just another activist playing dress up, a lawyer's blazer covering a full-time victim costume." The crowd gasped, then laughed. Not because it was clever, but because the stage lights and camera cuts made it feel like a punchline. Boebert didn't stop. She let the laughter rise, then sliced through it. "She wasn't elected for talent," she said, grinning. "She was a diversity pick. Nothing more. A box checked. Race and gender wrapped up in a soundbite." Her words were cold, calculated, meant to humiliate in the most public, irreversible way possible. Then came the final jab. Slow, deliberate, deadly. "That's not justice. That's a free pass wrapped in a racial shield. That's not equality. That's entitlement with a spotlight." The audience erupted again, clapping and hooting like it was comedy hour. But something in the room shifted, because while half the crowd laughed, the other half had gone completely still. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply lowered her eyes, scribbled something in her notebook, then closed it with care. No eye roll, no smirk, no comeback, just silence. And that silence hit harder than any scream. It was the kind of silence that rewired the tension in the room, tight, heavy, and growing by the second. But while Boebert's attacks sparked laughter on stage, Jasmine's silence wasn't surrender. It was restraint, disciplined, deliberate, and dangerous. Because Boebert wasn't just playing to the crowd, she was following a script Jasmine had already read 3 days earlier in an envelope that was never supposed to reach her hands. That morning, Jasmine had arrived early to her DC office. The hallway was still, the lights dimmed to save power before the staff clocked in. But on the floor just inside her door lay something out of place, a brown envelope. No return address, no logo, sealed, thick, heavy with intent. She picked it up slowly, closed the door behind her, and sat down without turning on the light. Instinct told her this wasn't campaign spam. This was a message someone wanted her to read and wanted no one else to see. She broke the seal. Inside, printed pages clipped neatly, stamped in faint red letters, "Internal Media Training, campaign use only. The first page bore an emblem from Boebert's congressional office, blurred slightly, maybe scanned in haste, but it was real. Jasmine's hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't change. She just began to read. And every line she read was a blueprint, not for communication, but for character destruction. The document didn't bother with policy or facts. It trained staff how to attack identity, twist emotion into weakness, and frame calmness as manipulation. One line said it plainly: frame them as emotional, not logical. Her eyes narrowed. The next line struck deeper. If they fight back, label them angry and unstable. Another page turned. The next instruction felt like a punch to the stomach. If they stay calm, accuse them of rehearsing. It wasn't just strategy, it was psychological warfare, sharpened for one purpose: take down women of color, not by debate, but by perception. Her fingers gripped the paper tighter. She had heard this tone before. She had seen women like her boxed into these traps, angry if loud, fake if quiet, unqualified no matter what. But this was no accident. It was orchestrated, designed. Then she saw it. A sentence near the bottom of page 4, circled twice in thick red pen, the kind of mark you make when you don't want anyone to miss it. It didn't try to be clever. It was pure calculation. Make the public believe they ruin themselves. Jasmine stared at the words. For a moment, time didn't move. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, a low, clinical drone. Then she slowly closed the folder. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. Her jaw clenched just slightly, more resolution than rage. And then in a voice that cut through the stillness like a scalpel, she said, "We're not playing by their rules." A beat. Her eyes locked forward, focused like iron drawn to fire. "We're exposing them. On their stage. Under their lights." She didn't slam the file. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood up and walked to the window. The sky outside was heavy with clouds. But her mind was already on Denver. Not on the questions she'd be asked, but on the moment she would stop answering and start revealing. She didn't wait long. The moment she finished reading the last line in that folder, Jasmine knew this wasn't going to be a press release. This was war, and the battleground would be live television. That afternoon, inside a quiet room deep in the Capitol, Jasmine sat across from her core media team. The lights were low, the blinds half drawn. Phones were silenced. No one was recording. Tension clung to the walls like static. Her aides leaned in, expecting fire, retaliation, a media blitz. But Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't even raise her eyes. No press conference, no counterattacks, no stooping to their circus, she said, her voice calm but razor sharp. "We won't fight them in the dark. We'll let the truth walk into the light, on its own feet, on their stage, under their spotlight." The room went silent. Even the air seemed to pause. The strategy was risky, but it was brilliant. One of her senior advisors, a veteran in dirty campaign seasons, slowly nodded. His voice was low, measured. "If it's going to work, it has to be you. Only you can stay calm enough to flip their blade back into their hands." No one disagreed, not because they were afraid to, but because deep down, they knew he was right. And just like that, the stage was set. No backup plan, no pre-show firestorm. Jasmine had chosen patience over noise, but now the lights were on. The broadcast had gone live, and the first move belonged to Boebert, exactly as Jasmine expected. The moment the host welcomed America to Voices Unfiltered, Boebert bulldozed right through his opening line. She didn't wait for her turn. She took it. "Let's get real," she snapped, voice sharp as broken glass. "Her party doesn't debate. They whine. They cry. They beg for sympathy, like it's a campaign strategy." Her tone wasn't angry. It was smug, performative, laced with a practiced cruelty designed for headlines. She leaned back with a smirk, knowing the control room would cut to audience reactions, knowing the crowd's half-laughs would echo louder than reason. The host tried to interject once, twice, failed both times. Boebert kept talking, slicing through protocol like it didn't exist. Every question became an excuse to twist the knife. She wasn't there to answer. She was there to hijack. Her goal was simple: bury Jasmine beneath a pile of insults before she could say a single word. Cameras zoomed in as Boebert raised her voice again, jabbing her hand toward Jasmine without looking directly at her. It was domination theater, and she'd rehearsed every beat. Finally, the host cleared his throat and pushed forward. His tone was strained but professional, trying to wrest back control. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said carefully, "how would you respond to critics who say politics today is driven too much by emotion?" The studio fell into a different kind of silence. Not respectful, but tense, like everyone waiting for a car crash. Jasmine didn't move at first. She didn't blink. Then slowly, deliberately, she lifted her chin and met the camera head on. Her voice came low but steady, each word sharper than the last. "The problem isn't emotion," she said. "The problem is who's controlling that emotion and what they're using it for." She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to, because somehow in a room full of noise, her calmness was the loudest thing anyone heard. Her final words had landed like a trapdoor opening beneath the stage, and for a split second, the entire room hovered in that strange silence where no one dares move. Jasmine had shifted the weight of the conversation without raising her voice, and now, just as the tension began to tighten around everyone's lungs, she reached for the moment she'd been waiting for. Slowly, with complete composure, Jasmine leaned forward and unlatched her leather case. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath stayed level. With quiet precision, she pulled out a single sheet of paper, one page. No drama, no theatrics, just truth in its rawest form. She held it up for a beat, not to flash it, but to show that it wasn't thick with spin or doctored evidence. Then she turned to the host and said, voice smooth and cutting, "This is an excerpt from Congresswoman Boebert's internal campaign media training." Gasps didn't fill the room. Something heavier did. A shift. The audience, the crew, even Boebert froze. Not physically, but mentally. Jasmine handed the paper to the host like it weighed nothing, but everyone in the room could feel its mass. He took it with cautious fingers, scanned it quickly, then adjusted his mic as his eyes settled on one bolded line near the top. He read it out loud, slowly, clearly. "Provoke your opponent until they lose control, then label them a threat." The words didn't echo. They shattered. They hung in the air like a live charge. The audience that had been laughing minutes ago, silent. No one reached for applause. No one smiled. It was like a vacuum had sucked the oxygen from the room. Boebert's reaction came too fast to be calculated. She shot up from her chair, knocking it sideways with a loud metallic clang. Her face twisted, eyes wide with fury, fingers stabbing the air toward Jasmine like a dagger she no longer controlled. "This is fake! This is a setup! A dirty trick!" she screamed, voice raw, desperate, already unraveling. But the room didn't move. The moment had shifted. Jasmine didn't flinch. The host didn't interrupt. The audience didn't respond. Because deep down, everyone watching knew they weren't in the middle of a debate anymore. They were witnessing a revelation. The paper was still in the host's hand, but its impact had already detonated across the studio. Boebert's chair wobbled behind her, forgotten as she stood rigid and exposed under the unforgiving lights. Her eyes darted, searching for control that was slipping through her fingers. Then she pointed, fast, accusatory, desperate, as if the act of blaming could somehow rewind what had just been said. Her voice exploded across the studio. "Only someone afraid of the truth would pull a stunt like this," she screamed, the syllables jagged, coated in panic, masquerading as outrage. It wasn't confidence. It was combustion. Her finger trembled slightly, though she tried to hold it steady, like a prosecutor out of rhythm with her own argument. The studio didn't respond. No laughter, no cheers, only silence thick enough to press against the walls. Jasmine didn't move an inch. She sat still, spine straight, face unreadable. Then, with the same control she'd carried from the very first moment, she leaned forward just enough for the microphone to catch every word. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of calm that cuts deeper than rage. "It's unfortunate that you wrote those words yourself," she said, eyes fixed on Boebert like glass over fire. "I'm only here to make sure the country hears them." It was a sentence without frills, but it landed like a closing door. Final. unshakable, a line drawn in concrete. The camera shifted, slow, deliberate, cinematic, tightening in on Jasmine's face as the room held still. Then across the bottom of the screen, in crisp white text, came a question that felt more like a verdict. Truth or manipulation? No music played beneath it. No voiceover explained it. The studio lights hummed. The crowd froze. And somewhere between the silence and the spotlight, the audience, inside the room and across the country, realized they weren't watching a debate anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. The studio hadn't breathed since Jasmine's final line. The caption, "Truth or Manipulation," still lingered at the bottom of the screen, glowing like a warning flare in the dead quiet. Every eye in the room remained locked, not on Boebert now, but on Jasmine, on the paper, on the still unfolding collapse of the illusion Boebert had worked so hard to control. But then, before the silence could settle into something permanent, a monitor behind the host flickered. The light changed. A name appeared on screen, and the tension, impossibly, deepened. Isabel Tran, former communications aide to Representative Lauren Boebert. There was no intro music, no scripted transition. The camera simply cut to a woman in a plain blouse, sitting in what looked like a home office, shoulders squared, face lit not by fear, but by decision. Isabel Tran. A name that hadn't meant anything to the public, until now. She looked directly into the lens. No hesitation, no nerves. Her voice was steady, every syllable hitting like a gavel. "I personally edited that document," she said. "We were trained to provoke women of color, to push them until they broke, then slap the label unhinged on them like it was protocol." The studio, already ice cold, dropped several more degrees. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't a maybe. It was a first-person confirmation, delivered on live television, and it hit like a controlled demolition. Gasps didn't come. The moment had moved beyond gasps. People in the crowd simply stared. Some leaned forward slowly, almost involuntarily, as if being pulled toward a gravitational shift they couldn't escape. Even the crew behind the cameras stood still, earpieces buzzing, not moving. No one wanted to miss what might come next. But what came next was rage. Boebert's voice snapped through the silence like a whip. She didn't sit, didn't collect herself. She exploded. "She's a traitor!" she screamed, jabbing her finger at the screen like Isabel could feel it through the glass. "A backstabber looking for attention." The words didn't land. They bounced. They flailed. Her voice cracked under its own weight, climbing in pitch, losing shape. Her eyes weren't fire anymore. They were smoke, wild, directionless, suffocating. And the room didn't move. The outburst that once would have sparked applause now landed in a graveyard of disbelief. Even her allies, those who had laughed at her earlier jabs, sat stone-faced. The fury that once served her had turned into noise. And for the first time that night, Lauren Boebert looked like the only person in the room who didn't realize the script had changed. Because now the one thing she couldn't outrun had arrived, witness testimony from inside her own walls. The scream of "traitor" hadn't even finished bouncing off the studio walls before the political ground began to shift. It was no longer about one broadcast or one confrontation. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just peeled back a moment. She'd ripped the mask off an entire machine. And in Washington, when the mask slips, the system starts to shake. Before dawn the next morning, the House Ethics Committee convened an emergency session behind closed doors. It wasn't a gesture. It wasn't for show. It was damage control. The document Jasmine revealed had been verified by 3 independent sources overnight, including one inside Boebert's own communications team. The metadata, the phrasing, the timestamp, all real. But what turned panic into full-blown crisis wasn't the document itself. It was what it suggested. Because once the committee dug deeper, they found it wasn't just Boebert. It wasn't isolated. It was everywhere. Digital footprints led to similar training packets used by at least 5 other congressional offices, all from the same wing of the party. These weren't loose comments or off-the-cuff strategies. They were polished, structured, and repeated. How to trigger, how to label, how to discredit. Each file used the same coded phrases. Each one weaponized tone, facial expression, and identity. Each one had targets. Black women in office. The phrase emotional framing tactics appeared across multiple internal presentations. It was the official term, not satire, not sarcasm. It was real and it was coordinated. A tool designed to provoke rage and call it instability, to bait silence and call it manipulation, to turn composure into calculation. In essence, it was strategy masquerading as politics, built to dehumanize before the facts ever had a chance. Once that phrase hit the press, it exploded. Within hours, emotional framing tactics was trending across every major platform. CNN ran a four-part expose by noon. MSNBC labeled it a political virus. Even typically conservative outlets were forced to cover it, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't avoid it. Video compilations began surfacing online, showing members like Jasmine, Ayanna Pressley, and Ilhan Omar being interrupted, shouted over, and then condemned as hostile or overly emotional. When viewed alone, the clips had seemed isolated. But now the pattern was undeniable. The script had been hiding in plain sight. Jasmine's clip, calm and surgical, became the anchor of the narrative. It was played on repeat, her voice low, her words exact, her delivery unflinching. Then Isabel Tran's feed, clean, clear, and damning, followed close behind. Audiences watched it all unfold in real time, and for once they didn't just react, they absorbed. The lie was too big to ignore. Capitol Hill roared with whispers and back-channel panic. Staffers deleted emails. Some denied knowledge. Others came forward anonymously, describing pressure to rattle opponents in hearings and stage media moments designed to humiliate. The political game was being stripped bare, and what lay underneath wasn't strategy. It was cruelty engineered for applause. And then came the moment no one, not even Jasmine, could have anticipated. The House floor was nearly empty that night, just a skeleton crew for late procedural votes. C-SPAN was still running, mostly unwatched, but somewhere in that dim chamber, an old voice decided to speak. Congressman Richard Mallory, Republican from Utah, 63 years old, 4 terms, a man known more for party loyalty than public conscience. He stood slowly, no prepared speech, no handlers, just him and the silence. He cleared his throat once, twice, then spoke into the mic with a tone that sounded more like confession than politics. I don't agree with Congresswoman Crockett. A pause, no reaction, just the air waiting to see where he would go. But I have to admit, he looked around the room, eyes weary, jaw set. The system I once defended has turned emotion into a dirty weapon. Silence. Complete, unforgiving silence. Not even the rustle of papers. Not even the creak of leather chairs. Just those words left hanging in the chamber like smoke from a fire that no one could pretend hadn't started. No one applauded. No one heckled. Not even the news anchors knew how to respond. But within an hour, the clip had over 1 million views. By morning, it would be 15. People weren't watching for the politics anymore. They were watching for the cracks. And now the cracks weren't hiding. Back in the hearing rooms, investigations deepened. The Ethics Committee expanded its scope. Witnesses were called, emails were subpoenaed. For the first time in years, ethics actually meant something on the Hill. Lawmakers who once rolled their eyes at accusations of bias now found themselves in legal briefings, trying to explain why their staff had slides labeled trigger tactics. And through it all, Jasmine remained silent. Not because she didn't have more to say, but because she didn't need to. She had already said everything, and the system had finally started listening. 1 week later, the dust hadn't settled. It had thickened. The headlines were still burning, the Ethics Committee still digging, and the phrase emotional framing tactics had become a national scar. But now Voices Unfiltered was going live again. Same set, same stage, same lights. But this time, the atmosphere was different, heavier, sharper. Like everyone knew they weren't about to witness a debate. They were about to watch the final move. The host opened the show with unusual restraint. There was no flashy intro, no dramatic monologue. Just a direct camera shot and a single line. Tonight, we return to where it started, with Congresswoman Boebert and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, to finish what began on this stage. The tension didn't need building. It was already coiled so tight the air itself felt like it might snap. Boebert entered first, slower this time. Her stride was rehearsed, her smile taut, her eyes flickering between the crowd and the cameras like someone trying to read a teleprompter that no longer loved her. She sat, adjusted her mic, nodded mechanically to the host. Her team had briefed her endlessly for this moment. Control the tone, reframe the narrative, deny what can't be disproved. She'd done it before, but this time the floor didn't belong to her. Then Jasmine walked in. No pretense, no nerves, just presence. The studio didn't cheer, but they didn't need to. Their silence was respect now, not uncertainty. She took her seat calmly, greeted no one, and waited. Because tonight she wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to deliver something final. The host turned to Boebert first, offering her a chance to address the controversy. She launched in immediately, voice tight but polished. Look, I won't apologize for standing firm. I've been the target of lies, leaks, and staged ambushes. And the so-called evidence people have thrown around, taken out of context, misrepresented. If we start criminalizing every internal note, then we're silencing political strategy altogether. She forced a half smile, eyes scanning for approval, but none came. Then the host turned to Jasmine. Her voice was quiet but not soft, measured, steel wrapped in velvet. I appreciate the chance to return, she said, because last time I brought words. She reached beneath the desk and lifted a folder, thick and stamped. The light caught the edge of it just long enough for the gold seal to glint under the camera. This time, I brought proof. Boebert stiffened. Her eyes locked onto the folder, her hands clenched on her lap. Jasmine held it up with precision. I brought the original file, complete with internal clearance stamps and a verified signature from Congresswoman Boebert's own office. She placed it gently on the table, sliding it toward the host. This is no longer a matter of narrative. This is no longer a back and forth. This, she tapped the folder, is a trail, and it doesn't lead to me. The host looked down, visibly caught off guard. He opened the folder slowly, flipping through the first page, the second, the third. Then he stopped. His hand hovered over one line, and his eyebrows raised just slightly. I'm holding in my hand a document marked with a clearance stamp from the Committee for Digital Communications, he said aloud. And, yes, there is a signature. It matches the one on Representative Boebert's official filings. He looked up at the camera. It's authentic. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was seismic, a silence with weight. Boebert didn't speak, couldn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes blinked fast as if trying to reset everything around her. But it didn't work, because now it wasn't just words in the air. It was ink. It was official. It was irrefutable. Her face collapsed, not all at once, but in fragments. The practiced posture, the trained defiance, the armor. It all cracked under the weight of that one word, authentic. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just stared at the folder like it was a ghost dragging her past into the room. Then slowly, the first sound broke the silence. Clap, then another, and another. The audience didn't erupt. They rose, one by one, row by row, like dominoes of justice tipping in real time. Applause filled the studio, not frantic, not forced, but pulsing, relentless, righteous. It wasn't celebration, it was confirmation. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't bask. She just sat still as the room rose around her. Not victorious, just finished. Boebert lowered her eyes, not in shame, in surrender, because there was nothing left to say. The applause had faded, the lights dimmed, and while the world kept replaying the moment Boebert fell silent, Jasmine had already stepped off the stage, quietly, intentionally. No victory lap, no late-night interviews, no campaign bump. She didn't tweet a quote. She didn't retweet the headlines. While the media flooded the airwaves with analysis and celebration, Jasmine Crockett vanished from the spotlight. Not out of fear, out of discipline, out of purpose. 1 week later, she reappeared, not in D.C., not in front of a cheering crowd, but in a narrow lecture hall at Tulane University in New Orleans. 40 chairs, mostly filled by first-year law students. No cameras, no makeup team, no handlers. She wore a gray blazer over a black tee and sat casually at the front of the room, legs crossed, hands resting calmly in her lap. If anyone expected fireworks, they were in the wrong place. Jasmine didn't come to be celebrated. She came to speak plainly. There was no podium, no notes, just a circle of students who had watched the storm unfold from afar and wanted to know what came after the smoke cleared. The professor introduced her briefly, voice soft, almost reverent. Then Jasmine looked around the room, eyes scanning every face. She didn't smile big. She didn't start with a monologue. She leaned in slightly and said, "Let's talk." For a few minutes, she walked them through the legal mechanics of what had happened. Evidence, confirmation, congressional process. Her tone was precise but never distant. The students listened intently, scribbling notes that didn't just feel academic, they felt personal. Then as the topic turned to media pressure and public scrutiny, one student raised their hand. "Why didn't you take a victory tour?" the student asked. "You could have owned the narrative." Jasmine's response was quiet, but it cut deeper than any headline. "Truth doesn't need a microphone," she said. "It just needs room to echo." The room went still. Some leaned back, some leaned forward, but all eyes stayed locked on her. She let the silence stretch, not as drama, but as respect for the weight of what had just been said. Another student raised her hand, a black woman near the middle row. Her voice wavered at first, but her question hit with clarity. "Do you ever get tired of having to be perfect just to be heard? Don't you ever feel like the standard's higher for you, just because you're a black woman in power?" Jasmine paused. Then she smiled, not out of amusement, but out of recognition. The kind of smile that carries both understanding and exhaustion. She looked the student dead in the eye and said, "I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be clear." She leaned forward again, this time slower. And clarity, that's what this system fears the most. There was a shift in the room, not loud, not dramatic, but visible, like the atmosphere itself had been rewired. These weren't just students anymore. They were witnesses to a moment no textbook could replicate. Jasmine hadn't come to inspire. She came to confirm what many of them already knew, but rarely heard said aloud, that the game was rigged. But silence was never the answer. Precision was. A young man near the back spoke next. "So what's next? For you, I mean." His tone wasn't curious. It was heavy, like he already knew there wasn't a simple answer. Jasmine took a breath. "Next," she repeated almost to herself. "Next is making sure no one forgets what happened before they try to reframe it." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Systems don't change because someone exposes them once. They change when the people inside them decide the cost of silence is higher than the risk of truth. Another pause. This time no one moved. She looked around the room again. Every pair of eyes held something different. Anger, resolve, fatigue, hope. Jasmine saw it all. Then she said, "The law is a tool, but a tool in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. And our job, yours and mine, is to decide who holds it and who pays when it's misused." The professor cleared his throat gently, signaling that time was running short, but no one made a move to pack up. One final question came from the front row. "Would you do it again?" the student asked. "Knowing the backlash? Knowing how dirty it got?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "In a heartbeat," she said, "because for every person who thought I was too loud, too calm, too direct, too black, too female, there were 10 more who needed to see what it looks like when truth refuses to flinch." And with that, she stood. There was no standing ovation, no camera flash, just quiet respect. Heads nodding, hearts recalibrated. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the part no headline would capture. Jasmine didn't need applause to validate her position. She just needed to make sure the next generation saw the playbook and knew how to write their own. As she left the room, the students sat still for a beat longer, as if trying to memorize the silence she left behind. Not the silence of defeat, the silence that follows when someone says exactly what needed to be said, and then lets it echo. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.